Today, we are focusing on a case that is both a profound American tragedy and, at the same time, a catalyst for fundamental change in law enforcement and child protection.
A truly pivotal case.
Our sources detail the events surrounding the 1981 murder of 6-year-old Adam Walsh, a crime that really galvanized the nation and irrevocably altered how we approach missing persons. We're undertaking an intensive analysis of the materials you provided, tracing the initial, frankly disastrous investigation all the way through to the massive legislative and societal transformation that followed.
This is a challenging topic, and it requires us to confront an immense loss. But the historical value of this material is just undeniable.
It really is.
Our goal here is to examine how this single event transitioned from, an individual case of local failure to a pivotal moment in national policy.
Right.
We'll scrutinize the investigative controversies, the lost evidence, the conflicting suspects, and then turn our attention to the lasting, powerful legacy championed by Adam's parents, most famously his father, John Walsh.
Let's begin by grounding ourselves in the facts of that day. Adam John Walsh, born November 14, 1974, was a first grader whose life was cut short on Monday, July 27, 1981.
And the location was the Hollywood Mall in Hollywood, Florida, specifically inside a Sears department store.
Exactly. And while the tragedy itself occurred that day, the national awakening really came 2 years later, in 1983, with the broadcast of the television film Adam.
An incredibly powerful film.
That film, based directly on this case, was seen by a staggering 38 million people in its original airing.
38 million.
That viewership figure alone just tells you the scale of the public shock this story would soon generate.
Well, that film didn't just report the news, it catalyzed a movement. But to appreciate the monumental legislative changes, you have to fully comprehend the sequence of events that unfolded that afternoon in July 1981.
And the initial devastating failures of the response.
Exactly.
So the scene was a typical summer day trip to the mall. Adam accompanied his mother, Revé, to the Sears store.
And her reason for being there was, completely mundane. She was there to ask about a lamp that was on sale.
Just a normal errand. Around 12:15 p.m., Revé temporarily left Adam near a popular attraction of the era, a kiosk displaying the new Atari 2600 video game console.
Right, and there were several older boys already there, gathered around, taking turns playing. It's an incredibly relatable scenario for any parent who just needed a moment to focus on an adult task.
Of course.
And this is where the narrative shifts from a mundane shopping trip to a catastrophic event. Revé returned a short time later, fully expecting to find Adam still playing, but he was gone.
When she inquired, she learned there had been a scuffle of some kind.
Yeah, the reports indicated that the group of boys had been arguing, likely over whose turn it was at the gaming kiosk, which led to a small disruption. And a store security guard intervened.
The guard's intervention is the critical flashpoint here. The sources indicate that the guard, wanting to disperse the commotion, demanded that the boys leave the store entirely.
And he reportedly asked the older boys if they were with their parents. They said no.
And here is where the parents, piecing together the events later, generated their theory of what happened specifically to Adam.
He was only 6 years old and was known to be quite shy, not confrontational. The Walshes theorized that Adam, likely intimidated by the guard and the older boys, was just unable to speak up or articulate to the guard that his mother was, in fact, still inside the store.
So the guard just presumed he was with the others.
Exactly. The guard, presuming Adam was with the older, disruptive boys, instructed him to exit. And critically, he was forced out through the Sears West entrance, an exit Adam was completely unfamiliar with.
So when the older boys immediately dispersed, Adam was left alone.
Suddenly isolated and outside the safety of the store.
Imagine that moment of confusion and terror for a 6-year-old. Meanwhile, inside, Revé's immediate concern is turning to panic.
She frantically searched the immediate area and then began trying to page him over the public address system.
The sources mention the chilling coincidence that she ran into her mother-in-law, Jean, who then joined the effort.
Yeah, and for an agonizing 90 minutes, they searched using the store's PA system before Revé finally realized the situation was escalating far beyond just a lost child.
And that's when she called the Hollywood police at 1:55 p.m.
And that period, that crucial 90 minutes, was filled with activity, but not the right kind of activity. Later criticism focused heavily on the delay in involving law enforcement.
Right, and the subsequent classification of the case.
Exactly. Local police initially treated it as a runaway or a simple missing person, which meant that critical early response protocols were just not activated.
So for 2 long weeks, the community searched, and the parents held on to hope.
That hope was just brutally extinguished 2 weeks later on August 10th.
The discovery was made not in Hollywood, but nearly 130 miles or 210 kilometers north of the city.
A detective and a deputy located a severed head in a drainage canal running alongside the Florida Turnpike near Vero Beach.
The sheer distance immediately indicated that the abduction was carried out by a predator who was highly mobile.
And who left the scene quickly, crossing multiple jurisdictional lines.
The next morning, before the remains were positively identified, John and Revé appeared on national television, clinging to the possibility that Adam was still alive.
They posted a substantial reward, $100,000, a massive sum at the time.
Equivalent to nearly $346,000 in today's currency.
Right, just hoping to spur information for Adam's safe return.
The identification soon followed, though, confirming the worst fears. Adam's remains were identified.
And the coroner determined the cause of death was asphyxiation.
Meaning he was likely strangled or suffocated.
Yes. Furthermore, the state of the remains suggested he had died several days before the discovery, meaning he was likely killed shortly after he was taken.
And here is a detail that just speaks volumes about the prolonged trauma endured by the family and the failings of the justice system.
The rest of Adam's body was never recovered.
Never.
And the severed head, the only physical evidence of Adam left behind, was actually held in the morgue for analysis and evidence purposes until the case was formally closed in 2008.
27 long years later.
27 years. That single fact just encapsulates the bureaucratic, emotional, and legal limbo the Walsh family was trapped in.
That delayed closure immediately sets the stage for the intense, decades-long criticism the parents levied against the handling of the case.
Absolutely. The investigation was fraught with issues from the very beginning. John and Revé Walsh were vocal critics, arguing that the Hollywood Police Department fundamentally botched the initial missing person response and the subsequent murder investigation.
And this criticism wasn't just born of grief, it was rooted in the perceived failure to quickly escalate the search and secure crucial evidence in the immediate aftermath.
And this criticism becomes painfully relevant as the investigation focuses on a highly problematic figure, Otis Toole.
He became the primary suspect based on the police's reconstruction of events. They concluded Adam was abducted by Toole near the front exterior of Sears after being instructed to leave.
Toole's involvement introduced immediate problems of reliability. I mean, he was a drifter and a known associate, a confidant of convicted serial killer Henry Lee Lucas.
Right, and both men were notorious for weaving these intricate lies, often confessing to hundreds of homicides nationwide.
Many of which were later proven to be physically impossible for them to have committed.
So this pattern of confessing and then retracting their accounts, often driven by a desire for attention or, better prison conditions.
It meant that Toole's testimony required irrefutable corroboration.
Yet, the details Toole provided in his confessions were incredibly specific and horrifying. They seemed to indicate some insider knowledge of the crime.
They really did. He claimed he lured Adam into his vehicle, which was described as a white 1971 Cadillac sedan DeVille with a damaged bumper.
And he said he did it by offering candy and toys.
He detailed driving north on Interstate 95, heading toward Jacksonville. And when Adam began to panic during the drive, Toole claimed to have punched him, then walloped him unconscious when the child's distress intensified.
Just a horrific account.
And the alleged crime continued to escalate. Toole described taking the unconscious boy off the Florida Turnpike onto a deserted service road in St. Lucie County.
And when he realized Adam was still breathing,
he claimed he strangled him to death using a seatbelt. Then came the chilling account of the disposal. He said he dragged the body out, decapitated Adam with a machete,
and later incinerated the torso in an old refrigerator when he arrived at his home in Jacksonville.
He even offered this bizarre, twisted motive suggesting he wanted Adam as an adopted son, a claim that just defied logic but added to the overall grotesqueness of the confession.
Despite the specificity of these claims, police never charged Toole. And this brings us to the critical failure the sources highlight.
The loss of physical evidence.
It's exactly. The Hollywood Police Department reportedly lost 3 crucial pieces of evidence that could have corroborated Toole's statements.
You have the blood-stained carpet taken from the Cadillac, the machete Toole claimed to have used for the decapitation.
And eventually, the car itself, the entire car.
The loss of the car, the carpet, and the weapon was a catastrophic failure of procedure, likely due to mishandling or, inadequate storage in the early years of the investigation.
And in a legal context, if you lose the physical evidence that links the suspect directly to the victim's remains or the method of death, you make the prosecution of an already unreliable confessor nearly impossible.
It doesn't matter how detailed his story is at that point. Without the ability to charge Toole, the case just languished.
Toole died in prison of liver failure in September 1996, serving a sentence for unrelated crimes. The case seemed destined to remain unsolved.
But even after his death, the connection persisted. Our sources note that his niece later reached out to John Walsh,
asserting that Toole made a deathbed confession to Adam's murder, reinforcing the police's long-held suspicion.
So Toole may have been the primary focus, but the subsequent arrest of another serial killer forced investigators and the public to consider an alternative, equally terrifying possibility.
Jeffrey Dahmer.
Suspect B emerged years later following his 1991 arrest in Milwaukee.
And the potential connection was jarring. The sources remind us that at the time of Adam's murder in 1981, Dahmer was living in Miami Beach, a relatively short drive from Hollywood.
What made the connection compelling were the circumstantial overlaps. 2 witnesses reportedly placed Dahmer at the Hollywood Mall on the day of the abduction.
Right. One witness claims to have seen a strange man in the toy department, which was near the Sears entrance.
And more dramatically, the other witness claimed to have seen a young, blond man with a distinctive protruding chin throw a struggling child into a blue van and speed off.
When Dahmer's image was widely circulated after his arrest, both witnesses allegedly recognized him.
And the procedural links were horrifyingly consistent. Reports revealed that the delivery shop where Dahmer worked did, in fact, use a blue van at the time.
Furthermore, his known modus operandi frequently involved the dismemberment and severing of his victims' heads.
A direct and terrifying parallel to the state of Adam's remains. While most of his victims were older, young men and boys, the method of disposal strongly suggested involvement.
Yet when investigators interviewed Dahmer in 1992, his denial was absolute.
He claimed he had been completely forthcoming about his dozens of victims, even detailing acts of cannibalism and the cooking of remains.
He famously asked the investigators, "I've told you everything, how I killed them, how I cooked them, who I ate. Why wouldn't I tell you if I did it to someone else?"
His claim was that he had laid bare the entire extent of his crimes.
That denial sounds definitive, but the sources immediately cast doubt on its sincerity.
Yes. It was widely reported that Dahmer's primary motivation for denial in this specific case was fear. He allegedly believed that if he confessed to killing a 6-year-old, a crime that would legally classify him as a pedophile, he would be targeted and killed by other inmates in prison.
So this is a crucial analytical point for us. It means that Dahmer's denial was potentially strategic and self-serving, designed for prison survival rather than factual.
It significantly undermines the credibility of his full confession regarding this specific crime.
Ultimately, though, John Walsh, maintaining a rigorous objectivity throughout, eventually stated that he had seen no evidence that definitively linked Dahmer to the abduction and murder of his son.
Which left the Toole theory as the strongest available, despite all of its flaws.
So for decades, the case was defined by 2 primary suspects: a serial liar whose physical evidence was lost, and a confirmed monster whose alibi was questionable but convenient.
And this uncertainty, this failure to secure a conviction, left an open wound in the public consciousness, and more importantly for the Walsh family.
The pressure for formal resolution was just relentless, driven by the continued, highly public advocacy of John Walsh.
His book, Tears of Rage, which was released in 1997, essentially forced the Hollywood Police Department to take a fresh look at the evidence decades after the crime.
The department responded, in part, by tasking the new Hollywood police chief, Rick Stone, with an exhaustive review.
And Stone, who had a background in other large police departments and was not part of the original investigation, he came into the case with fresh eyes.
His review focused intensely on the surviving evidence, specifically the taped interrogations of Otis Toole conducted by a Hollywood detective.
Right. So he had to weigh the content of Toole's confessions against the known facts and the unreliability issues inherent in Toole's history.
After a thorough analysis, Stone reached a significant internal conclusion. He found evidence, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Otis Toole was Adam's murderer.
Now, to be clear for the listener, this term, beyond a reasonable doubt, that's the highest legal standard required for a criminal conviction.
So when a police chief uses this term internally in 1997, decades after the fact, knowing that the physical evidence is lost and the suspect is dead.
It indicates the overwhelming consensus within the department, based solely on the testimonial evidence and circumstances, was that Toole was the killer.
It shows a commitment to moral certainty even if legal prosecution was impossible.
Exactly.
This internal finding was critical, but it still didn't represent formal closure to the public or the family. The case continued to technically remain open until 2008.
11 years after Stone's review, the Hollywood police chief at the time, Chad Wagner, made the final official announcement.
On December 16, 2008, with Adam's parents present, the police announced that the case was officially closed.
This closure, which was based on an external review that confirmed the findings against Toole, it was an administrative act. It wasn't a satisfying judicial conviction, but it provided the finality the family and the department needed.
They formally concluded that Otis Toole was the murderer, bringing an end to the active investigation 27 years after Adam was taken.
And it was only at this point, in 2008, that the final, profoundly painful detail could be addressed.
The severed head, which was the only recovered part of Adam's body and had been held in the morgue for nearly 3 decades, was finally released to the family for burial.
The official closure, however imperfect, allowed the Walshes to finally complete the process of grieving and put Adam's remains to rest.
It highlights a tragic truth about complex cases. Sometimes, closure is achieved through rigorous administrative consensus rather than courtroom justice.
But the sheer longevity of this case, its heartbreak, and the controversy surrounding it were the very elements that fueled a massive transformation in American society.
And this is truly the monumental component of the Walsh tragedy. The sources make it clear that Adam's father, John Walsh, transformed his overwhelming personal grief into a powerful, unrelenting mission.
He immediately became a vocal, tireless advocate for victims of violent crimes.
Walsh recognized that the failure in his son's case was systemic, that the infrastructure to track and find missing children simply did not exist at the time.
His advocacy quickly moved into media influence, culminating in him becoming the host of the television program America's Most Wanted in 1988.
A show that fundamentally changed how the public interacted with law enforcement. It often led directly to the apprehension of criminals.
And he later continued this mission with programs like The Hunt and In Pursuit with John Walsh, making his face synonymous with the pursuit of justice and the search for fugitives.
But even before America's Most Wanted, the television film Adam was the initial rocket fuel.
Yeah, when it premiered on October 10th, 1983, its incredible reach, those 38 million viewers, turned a single crime into a national crisis awareness moment.
The film's creators used that massive platform strategically.
They did. During each of its 3 broadcasts in 1983, 1984, and 1985, the film was followed by pictures and descriptions of other missing children.
And they established a dedicated hotline for viewers to call in tips.
This combined effort was directly credited with finding 13 of the 55 children who were profiled in those segments.
13?
Yeah.
That's an almost unbelievable success rate for a non-law enforcement media campaign.
And the power of that televised plea is illustrated by a striking anecdote mentioned in the sources.
The American rapper Bizzy Bone, then known as Brian McCain. He had been abducted by his stepfather.
And he was reunited with his mother after a babysitter recognized his photograph during the broadcast of Adam. The film quite literally saved or restored families across the country.
The momentum generated by this highly visible advocacy translated directly into foundational organizational and legislative changes that define child protection in America today.
The first major step came in 1984, when the U.S. Congress passed the Missing Children's Assistance Act, largely in response to the Walsh's intense lobbying efforts.
That act was groundbreaking because it mandated the formation of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC.
Before this, there was no centralized mechanism for coordinating the search for missing children, collecting data, or connecting law enforcement across state lines. NCMEC became that essential, dedicated infrastructure.
It bridged the critical gap between local police departments and federal resources.
And Adam's name itself became integrated into everyday safety protocols. The sources note the creation of Code Adam,
the program designed to assist in finding lost children specifically within department stores, malls, public places.
It's a powerful, daily operational reminder of Adam's legacy, ensuring that the critical time window in the immediate aftermath of a disappearance is used effectively.
In a way that wasn't done in 1981 at the Hollywood Mall.
Exactly.
And the legislative impact continued well into the 21st century. The most sweeping change was the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act.
which Congress passed on July 25, 2006, and which President George W. Bush signed into law exactly on the 25th anniversary of Adam's abduction, July 27, 2006.
This was a landmark overhaul of federal law.
It really was. One of its key provisions established a robust national database of convicted child molesters, designed to improve tracking and interjurisdictional enforcement.
It also significantly increased penalties for various sexual and violent offenses against children. It aimed to create a uniform system for sex offender registration across all states.
Right, to address the issue of offenders moving across state lines to avoid being tracked.
And this is where the legal mechanics get particularly interesting for our listener. The Act created a novel application of federal law, a RICO cause of action specifically targeting child predators.
And for those unfamiliar, RICO stands for the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. It's historically been a powerful tool used to prosecute organized crime syndicates like the mafia.
By targeting the pattern of criminal activity over time rather than just individual acts.
The significance of using a RICO action here is profound. It allows federal authorities to treat systemic child exploitation, whether it's trafficking or the production of abuse material, as an organized criminal enterprise.
Which allows for massive asset forfeiture, broader conspiracy charges,
and more powerful federal investigations aimed at dismantling the financial and organizational structure of those who prey on children, rather than simply prosecuting one person for one offense.
And the commitment to these programs has endured.
It has. The Adam Walsh Reauthorization Act of 2016 was later incorporated into the Survivors' Bill of Rights Act of 2016 and signed by President Obama.
This legislation was vital, not just for budgetary reasons, ensuring continued funding for NCMEC and the registry system, but also to update the federal framework to account for evolving technology.
And the changing nature of online child exploitation and digital evidence gathering. It shows a continuous bipartisan commitment to reinforcing the protections born from this case.
So we see an unparalleled positive legacy of legislative and organizational change.
However, the sources also highlight a complex societal side effect of this intense media and advocacy focus.
The creation of what was described as a pervasive mid-1980s missing children panic over stranger abductions.
This panic fundamentally changed American childhood. Criminologist Richard Moran described this period as one that created a nation of petrified kids and paranoid parents.
He noted that parents abruptly shifted from allowing children independence to micromanaging every aspect of their social lives.
Yeah, he pointed out that kids used to organize stickball games outside without supervision. But after this panic, all playdates and the social lives of children are arranged and controlled by the parents.
He says the fear still lingers today.
And this fear was amplified by a crucial statistical issue the sources call the numbers gap. Early estimates, often promulgated by public service announcements, based on NCMEC's initial high-end figures,
suggested that a staggering 20,000 children were abducted by strangers annually.
20,000. This number was repeated constantly across media platforms, on television, in schools, even on milk cartons, and it justified the widespread fear.
But the reality, as highlighted by a 1986 Pulitzer Prize expose, was vastly different.
The FBI's own statistics showed they investigated only 67 abductions by total strangers in 1984.
67.
By 1990, rigorous studies confirmed that an overwhelming majority, 99% of child abductions were, in fact, family-related, typically during custody disputes.
Not the work of strangers waiting in vans.
The tension here is fascinating. The public needed a relatable, terrifying figure, and the stranger abductor, however statistically rare, was that figure.
Even when NCMEC significantly lowered its estimates of stranger abductions by 80% by 1988, that initial high 20,000 number had already taken root in the public imagination.
And that overwhelming fear, however statistically disproportionate, was the engine that ultimately drove Congress to pass the essential laws we still rely on.
And if we look forward, the sources offer a glimpse of how things have changed yet again. Between 2000 and 2015, the overall number of missing children who were ultimately killed decreased.
This positive trend is attributed in part to modern technologies, like mobile phones, which allowed children to communicate instantly or call for help. Technology continues to build on the foundational infrastructure the Walshes created.
If you look at the journey this case took, from a catastrophic failure of local police procedure in 1981 to the creation of federal RICO laws and NCMC by the 21st century, it shows the tremendous lasting power of a single family's tragedy to mandate societal safety.
It is a legacy forged in unimaginable loss, but one that continues to protect children every day.
As we conclude this intensive exploration of the sources, consider the following reflection. The sources detail the undeniable effectiveness of the media narrative, specifically the film Adam and John Walsh's televised advocacy in achieving massive, protective legislative change.
Mm-hmm.
We also know that this change was arguably driven by a societal panic based on wildly inflated statistics regarding stranger abductions.
A huge discrepancy.
What does this tension reveal about the nature of effective policymaking in a democracy? Do we rely more on emotional resonance and compelling narrative than we do on sober data and statistics to enact critical reforms?
That fundamental question, the relationship between deep-seated societal fear and the legislative solutions it demands, is something worth exploring further.
Thanks for listening.